Radio crackles with desperate urgency. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, we're going down! We're breaking apart!" The final transmission cuts to static as Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 182 becomes a nightmare written across the San Diego sky. On this crystal-clear morning of September 25, 1978, what began as a routine domestic flight would transform into one of aviation's most horrific disasters, forever changing how we see the skies above our cities. The images burned into witness memories that day would haunt investigators for decades, as a catastrophic mid-air collision sent bodies tumbling through the morning air, ejected from their aircraft in the most gruesome circumstances imaginable. This is the story of 144 souls who never made it home, and the tragic sequence of events that could have been prevented if only the system had worked as designed. Flight 182 started like any other Tuesday morning departure from Sacramento International Airport, with Captain James McFerrin and First Officer Robert Fox completing their pre-flight checks on the Boeing 727-24 tour. The aircraft, registration number November 5 and 33, Pacific Southwest, had been delivered to PSA just 2 years earlier and represented the airline's commitment to modern, reliable service along the California corridor. Captain McFerrin, a 42-year-old veteran with over 10,000 flight hours, was known among his peers as a meticulous pilot who took safety seriously, while 35-year-old First Officer Fox brought his own expertise with 5,500 hours of experience. The flight engineer, Martin Warner, completed the 3-person cockpit crew that would guide the 727 and its 128 passengers toward what should have been an uneventful landing in San Diego. As passengers settled into their seats for the short 1-hour flight, none could have imagined they were boarding an aircraft destined for one of the most devastating accidents in American aviation history. The morning departure proceeded without incident as Flight 182 climbed into the clear California skies, following a direct route southward over the Central Valley. Air traffic controllers at Sacramento handed the aircraft off to Los Angeles Center, where the routine nature of the flight continued as the crew maintained their assigned altitude and heading. The 727's 3 Pratt & Whitney engines hummed with their characteristic whine as the aircraft cruised at 35,000 feet, carrying families returning home, business travelers heading to meetings, and tourists eager to explore San Diego's attractions. Among the passengers were entire families, including children who pressed their faces against windows to watch the landscape scroll beneath them, unaware that their lives were measured now in minutes rather than decades. The cockpit voice recorder captured normal conversations between crew members as they discussed weather conditions, reviewed approach procedures for San Diego, and maintained the professional atmosphere that characterized PSA's reputation for safety and efficiency. Meanwhile, at Montgomery Field in San Diego, a very different kind of flight was beginning as student pilot David Boswell and his instructor Martin Casey prepared their Cessna 172 for what was intended to be a routine training session. The small single-engine aircraft, registration November 7711 Gulf, represented the kind of general aviation flight that shared California's busy airspace with commercial traffic every day. Boswell, eager to build hours toward his private pilot license, conducted his pre-flight inspection under Casey's watchful guidance, checking fuel, oil, and control surfaces with the methodical care that good instruction demanded. The Cessna was a modest aircraft compared to the sophisticated Boeing approaching from the north, but it carried the same responsibility for safety and the same precious cargo of human life. As the small aircraft taxied toward the active runway, neither pilot could have known they were about to become part of aviation history in the most tragic way possible. The convergence began as Flight 182 started its descent towards San Diego International Airport, following air traffic control instructions that would bring the 727 into the busy terminal area from the northeast. Lindbergh Field, as locals still called the airport, sat in the heart of San Diego, surrounded by urban development that made precision approaches essential and left little room for error. The airport's single runway oriented east-west created a natural bottleneck for all arriving traffic, requiring careful sequencing and separation that depended entirely on air traffic controllers maintaining situational awareness of every aircraft in their sector. As the PSA flight descended through 5,000 feet, First Officer Fox established communication with San Diego Approach Control, beginning the choreographed dance of vectors and altitude assignments that should have brought them safely to the runway. Unknown to the crew, their flight path was beginning to intersect with that of the small Cessna conducting training maneuvers in the same general area under visual flight rules. The first indication of potential conflict came as San Diego Approach Control issued traffic advisories to Flight 182, informing the crew of the small aircraft operating in their vicinity. PSA 182, traffic 12 o'clock, 1 mile, a Cessna, came the controller's voice, establishing the beginning of a sequence that would test the sea and avoid system that formed aviation's last line of defense against mid-air collisions. Captain McFerrin acknowledged the traffic call and reported the Cessna in sight, a standard response that should have ensured continued separation between the two aircraft. The controller, believing both aircraft had visual contact with each other, cleared Flight 182 to maintain visual separation from the smaller plane, effectively transferring responsibility for avoiding collision from ground control to the pilots themselves. This seemingly routine handoff of responsibility represented a critical moment where the margin for error began to shrink dramatically. The Cessna, meanwhile, continued its training flight pattern as instructor. Casey guided student pilot Boswell through various maneuvers designed to build confidence and skill in the congested airspace around a major airport. The small aircraft was conducting practice instrument approaches, a routine exercise that required periodic climbs, turns, and descents, as the student learned to interpret navigation aids and follow prescribed flight paths. Neither pilot in the Cessna was aware of the large passenger jet descending toward them from behind and above, as their attention focused on the training objectives and the multiple radio communications required to coordinate with air traffic control. The limitations of human vision, particularly when scanning for traffic in bright morning sunlight, began to play their deadly role as the two aircraft continued their converging paths toward the same point in space. Time compressed into those final crucial minutes as Flight 182 continued its descent on approach to runway 27, following vectors from San Diego Approach Control that should have aligned the aircraft with the localizer for an instrument landing system approach. The 727's speed, typical for a large commercial aircraft on approach, was nearly 3 times that of the small Cessna, meaning the rate of closure between the two planes was accelerating rapidly. Captain McFerrin made additional radio calls confirming visual contact with traffic, but the dynamic nature of the situation meant that what had been true moments before was changing with each passing second. The cockpit voice recorder captured normal approach preparations as the crew configured the aircraft for landing, extending flaps and landing gear, while running through their established checklists with professional precision that spoke to their training and experience. The physics of the situation were becoming inexorable as the two aircraft, separated by altitude and lateral distance that should have been adequate, began to converge due to slight variations in their respective flight paths. The Cessna's climb during its practice approach brought it directly into the path of the descending Boeing, while lateral drift caused by wind or minor course corrections eliminated the horizontal separation that had existed minutes earlier. Neither crew realized how rapidly their safety margins were disappearing, as the see and avoid system that worked well under ideal conditions began to fail under the complex circumstances of busy terminal airspace. The bright morning sun created visibility challenges, aircraft blind spots blocked crucial sight lines, and the inherent difficulty of judging the speed and distance of other aircraft combined to create a perfect storm of factors that would soon prove fatal. The moment of impact occurred at 9:01 a.m. Pacific time as the PSA 727, descending through 2,600 feet at approximately 180 knots, struck the Cessna 172 from behind and above in a collision that was both instantaneous and catastrophic. The small aircraft was virtually obliterated by the impact, its lightweight structure no match for the massive Boeing that struck it with the force of a building collapse. Pieces of the Cessna, including its engine and portions of the cockpit, were driven through the 727's fuselage like projectiles, while the airliner's right wing suffered structural damage that immediately compromised the aircraft's controllability. The collision occurred with such violence that parts of both aircraft were scattered across a wide area, beginning a debris field that would extend for miles as the crippled airliner began its final, uncontrollable descent toward the densely populated neighborhoods below. Inside Flight 182's cabin, the impact created immediate chaos as the structural damage caused explosive decompression and the aircraft began to break apart in flight. Passengers who had been calmly preparing for landing suddenly found themselves in a disintegrating aircraft as sections of the fuselage separated, and the normal environment of pressurized comfort became a nightmare of rushing wind, flying debris, and the terrifying realization that their aircraft was coming apart around them. The cockpit voice recorder captured the crew's desperate attempts to regain control, as Captain McFerran and First Officer Fox struggled with flight controls that no longer responded normally, their professional training inadequate to deal with the catastrophic structural damage that had transformed their aircraft into an uncontrollable projectile. The sound of rushing wind and structural failure filled the cockpit, as the crew realized they were fighting a losing battle against aerodynamic forces that would soon claim their lives and those of everyone aboard. The breakup sequence that followed represented every air traveler's worst nightmare, as Flight 182 began shedding pieces while still airborne, ejecting passengers and crew into the open sky from an altitude that offered no possibility of survival. Witness accounts from the ground describe the horrific sight of human bodies falling from the disintegrating aircraft, some still strapped to their seats, others torn free by the violent forces that were ripping the 727 apart section by section. The image of people falling from the sky burned itself into the memories of everyone who witnessed it, creating trauma that would last lifetimes among those who happened to look up that morning and see aviation's ultimate horror unfolding above their city. The physics of high-altitude breakup meant that passengers faced several minutes of consciousness during their fall, experiencing the ultimate terror of knowing their fate while being powerless to change it. Captain McFerran's final radio transmission came as a testament to professional duty, even in the face of certain death, as he managed to key his microphone and report, "Mayday, we're going down. This is PSA," before the aircraft's electrical systems failed completely. The crew fought until the very end to regain some measure of control, their training and instincts driving them to attempt the impossible even as their aircraft disintegrated around them. Flight 182's final moments were captured by multiple cameras and witnesses as the main fuselage, now stripped of its wings and empennage, plummeted toward the residential neighborhood of North Park like a falling building. The sight of the massive aircraft tumbling end over end through the morning sky created an indelible image that would symbolize both the fragility of flight and the courage of those who continued fighting for their passengers' lives even when hope was lost. The ground impact at 9:02 a.m. created a fireball that could be seen for miles as Flight 182's main fuselage struck a residential area on Dwight Street, instantly destroying multiple homes and claiming the lives of 7 people on the ground in addition to all 135 souls aboard the 2 aircraft. The crash site became an inferno of burning jet fuel, scattered wreckage, and personal effects that told the story of interrupted lives and shattered dreams. Emergency responders arrived to find a scene of devastation that challenged their training and emotional resilience, as body parts and aircraft debris were scattered across several city blocks in a pattern that spoke to the violence of the impact and breakup sequence. The recovery operation would take days, as investigators and rescue workers painstakingly searched through the wreckage for human remains and aircraft components that might explain how such a tragedy could occur in controlled airspace, with experienced crews and functioning equipment. The investigation that followed revealed a complex chain of events where small failures in communication, visibility, and situational awareness combined to create a disaster that shocked the aviation industry and changed forever how aircraft operate in busy terminal areas. The National Transportation Safety Board's final report highlighted the limitations of the see and avoid system when applied to high-speed aircraft operating in congested airspace, leading to fundamental changes in air traffic control procedures and the development of technologies designed to prevent such collisions. The tragedy of Flight 182 demonstrated that even experienced crews operating properly maintained aircraft could fall victim to circumstances beyond their control, reinforcing the need for multiple layers of safety systems and the constant vigilance required to maintain aviation's remarkable safety record. The human cost of September 25, 1978 extended far beyond the immediate victims as families, friends, and entire communities struggled to comprehend a loss so sudden and complete. Among those killed were children traveling with their families, business people pursuing their careers, and ordinary citizens whose only mistake was being in the wrong place at the wrong time when 2 aircraft occupied the same space. The crew members of both aircraft died doing their jobs, following procedures and making decisions based on the best information available to them in those final critical moments. Their sacrifice was not in vain, if the lessons learned from their deaths help prevent future tragedies and remind all of us that aviation safety requires constant attention to the details that separate routine flights from catastrophic accidents. The legacy of PSA Flight 182 lives on in the improved safety systems, enhanced training procedures, and technological advances that have made such mid-air collisions increasingly rare in the decades since that terrible morning. The traffic collision avoidance system, now standard on commercial aircraft, provides automated warnings and resolution advisories that give crews precious extra seconds to avoid conflicts that might otherwise prove fatal. Air traffic control procedures have been refined to reduce reliance on visual separation in busy terminal areas, while enhanced radar systems provide controllers with better tools for maintaining aircraft separation. These improvements represent a memorial to those who died, ensuring that their sacrifice contributed to the safety of future generations of air travelers. Today, as you board your next flight and feel that moment of anxiety that touches even experienced travelers, remember that the systems protecting you were built on lessons learned from tragedies like Flight 182. The professional crews, sophisticated equipment, and layered safety procedures that surround every commercial flight exist because people like Captain McFerrin, First Officer Fox, and the 133 passengers who died that day helped us understand the price of complacency in aviation safety. Their memory lives on every time an aircraft lands safely, every time a potential conflict is detected and resolved, and every time someone chooses to make safety their first priority rather than accepting unnecessary risks. If this story has moved you to think differently about aviation safety, or if you've learned something new about the dedication required to keep our skies safe, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others who might benefit from understanding how tragedy can teach us to build better systems. Subscribe to our channel if you want to continue exploring the stories behind aviation's greatest lessons, because every accident prevented is a victory for everyone who flies. The crew and passengers of Flight 182 cannot be brought back, but their legacy can live on through our commitment to learning from the past and building a safer future for all who dare to slip the surly bonds of Earth and touch the sky.